So, Jack and Trudy, it's such an honor to have you with us at the Mindfulness Summit. Thank you so much for taking the time. And it's just always a lovely honor to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a pleasure, Soren. It's been a very long time. We've collaborated for decades now. And it's beautiful to watch how Wisdom 2.0 has flowered and how we've all been in it together.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Jack. I think it was the very first, was 11 years ago. I know we knew each other before that, but it was 11 years ago in which I think 11 or 12. And you supported this vision and really, really appreciate your friendship and have learned a lot from you. And I wondered, Trudy, if you could begin, this is a mindfulness we're calling it the Global Mindfulness Summit. And so while we talk about a lot of issues, kind of mindfulness is kind of the core topic. And I'm curious to hear from you, when did you first, at what age and what circumstance did you all of a sudden get interested in mindfulness and meditation? And how did you know, that's, I got to go into that, that's for me?
Yeah. It's a great question. I was in my, I'm not sure exactly, maybe 25, I think, when I started practicing mindfulness. And let's see here. And it happened really because of a series of course, events in my personal life that left me sort of bewildered and perplexed. And why is this happening? I found myself at age 24, a divorced single mom already. And, then my daughter became severely ill and almost died when she was 2 years old. So I had been through these experiences during my experience of childbirth. Oddly enough, I was alone, and that wouldn't ever happen today. I was alone for hours, and I knew nothing about the birth process. I was 21, or maybe I had just turned 22, but I had a very big mystical experience while I was in labor. And I thought, well, this is just what happens when people have a baby. I didn't think twice about it, actually, and I never talked about it. And those were not the days we were talking about things like that in 1967. And then when she almost died at age 2, there was a point where she coded and all these doctors came running. I was in Switzerland studying with Jean Piaget. And so we were in the Swiss pediatric hospital, very sort of marooned there, and I had another one of those experiences. And this time I really felt I had seen God, and that God wasn't anywhere else, that it was really in the compassion and the activity of the doctors and nurses trying to save her life, and me, her mom, and just the whole mandala. It became very clear to me. And this time, Soren, I wanted to find out, there must be people who know about this. What is this? And so when I moved back to the States, I started looking around, and I would go to different visiting swamis who would say, eat artichokes and say soha. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. And then I'm very grateful to my childhood friend, beloved oldest friend, John Kabat-Zinn, who our mutual friend, Larry Rosenberg, found this Zen master living in Providence, Rhode Island. And
you knew John from school?
We were friends. I met John when I was 14 and he was 15 because our dads were working together that year at the Institut Pasteur, at the Pasteur Institute in Paris. Our family went to meet an American family, and I was 14 and didn't even want to go. You can imagine, go in the car with your parents and meet some American family. But when I walked in and saw John's darling Romeo, my age, suddenly wasn't so bad. And we got to be friends. And, we were American kids studying in French schools, and we compared textbooks. And anyway, so that was the beginning of our friendship. And it's just a kind of, I don't know what, fluke of destiny that we both wound up devoting our lives separately, initially together, but then separately to this work of mindfulness and compassion. But John and Larry had found our first teacher, De Saint-Sanim. And honestly, how did I recognize him and get interested? Well, I was already interested from the experiences that I had had. And then when they took me to hear him speak, it wasn't what he was saying. He could barely speak English. He was saying the wall is white, the floor is brown, the sky is blue. It was not earth-shaking Zen, but there was a twinkle in his eye, and I thought, he knows what I want to know. He knows what I want to know. So that's how I began practicing.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Jack, was yours at Dartmouth, if I remember right? Dartmouth College. You took a class in Eastern Buddhism.
That's right, with this wonderful old professor, Dr. Wing-Sit Chan, who come up from Harvard to help start Asian studies at Dartmouth. And I'd had a lot of family suffering. My father was brilliant in some ways, but also paranoid and violent and abusive and all those kind of things. And I didn't know what to do with that. And I was taking organic chemistry and getting ready to, doing all my pre-med things. And this guy sat cross-legged on the desk sometimes, and he said, Buddhist teachings, they say there's suffering, they have causes, and there's an end to it. There's a path to it. There are practices to the end of it. And I sat up in my chair because no one had ever talked about suffering. And I realized that this is the education that I needed. So I started to do Asian studies and classics. And then I got more and more interested, and it didn't hurt that I dropped acid and became a hippie and kind of got involved in the whole counterculture movement and the anti-war movement and all kinds of other things. So when I graduated, I wanted to go to a Buddhist country. I asked the Peace Corps to send me to a Buddhist country to see if I could find one of those great old Zen masters like Trudy was talking about. Do they still exist? And I was sent to Thailand, and they said, where do you want to be? I said, the most remote place possible. So I was on the border of Laos and Cambodia during the war. Wow. And found this remarkable teacher who is still about the wisest person I ever met. And he was much younger then, didn't have a big following, but it was clear in his presence that he had more freedom of spirit and humor and spaciousness than anybody I'd ever met. And I knew that I didn't get what I needed in an Ivy League education because I didn't know how to make a relationship or how to deal with my own fear or anger or emotions or, what forgiveness was about. It's like half of my education, the education of the heart, was missing. Yeah. This offered it.
And that was that Ajahn Chah, that person?
That was Ajahn Chah. And then I went to other great masters in Burma and so forth.
Yeah. It's kind of a side story, but I got to visit him after he had his stroke. And he was in his hut and was being taken care of by attendants. And they kind of wheeled him out, and it was, I could tell, I kind of felt this presence, even though his body was not in the best shape. But the stories of him and the experience of him, I know has impacted so many people's lives. And I'm wondering, from both of you both have this like wealth of experience of practicing and teaching and working with, I don't know how many thousands, tens of thousands of students over the years. What are some of the things that you've learned that a lot of people struggle with, or that's like, if you knew now what you wished you knew when you started, are there pieces of wisdom that you think could have eased your journey along the path? Or was it just about sitting and noticing and being with the pain and going through layer and layer of pain, and it's just everyone's going to have to go through with it? Or are there pieces that you feel like, wow, this really helped me kind of like progress, or this really helped me get through those hard times?
I think it's both and. I mean, for me, I think that if there's one unifying strand that it seems like everybody has brought and struggles with when they begin to practice mindfulness, it's being hard on themselves, just people being so hard on themselves. And I was like that too. And I really feel, looking back, I was hard on some of the people that came to study with me, because my teachers, I studied Zen a lot in the early days for about 15 years. I also studied Vipassana, but it really depended on when there was a retreat, when I had childcare, when I had time off work, which one I would. People often ask, well, philosophically, how did you choose? It wasn't about that. It was really about when I could make it and had the support to make it. And I feel as though over the years, learning to practice loving kindness, learning to practice compassion, I do wish that I had known how perhaps to be a little bit more tender, and the heart gets tenderized with those practices. Now it gets tenderized anyway, as you said, just through going through layer and layer and sitting with the pain. But as a teacher, I kind of wish I'd had those a little bit earlier. And I'm so grateful to Sharon Salzberg, who in 1995 really put loving kindness front and center instead of this little adjunct, that we used to do at the end of a retreat or something. And I do think that a woman putting a very relational practice forward like that, that was pioneering and super important.
That's beautiful. And could you, because some people will have that, I think will hear that, but it's hard sometimes if we've never been taught to be kind to ourselves, to do compassion ourselves. Can you give us an example of an experience where, let's say, somebody's meditating, and how does that actually show up? Because I think a lot of people like the way it sounds, but it's not something that a lot of people kind of have a direct experience of. Is it possible to kind of give us a frame of how that might show up in an experience?
Well, I can give you a frame of how it showed up for a student and for me in lacking the loving kindness. Something that I've been haunted by over the years because I know better now. But I was teaching a retreat and teaching the loving kindness practice, and somebody just hit a wall, and they were hard on themselves. They felt like they couldn't do it. They weren't getting it right. And they just hit a wall, and they shared that had happened for them. And I remember just looking at them and saying, just keep going anyway, keep going through that wall, or, just really hardcore. So that to me was an example where somebody being hard on themselves and getting discouraged and falling into a certain despair was met with what I would say, a lack of compassion and attunement to their state. Now, did they keep going? Did they persevere? I wish I could remember. I don't think they left the retreat, but I do feel that's just an example of where I felt that kindness would have been more useful.
And if you could replay that and you were back in that moment now, do you know what you would have said? Or what do you say to students now?
Oh, yeah. I would have said to in that state of mind of just feeling like I can't go one step further, that is asking to be held in a tender and understanding way. And that with gentleness and the willingness to hold that in a kind of, a more compassionate and inclusive embrace, that through that willingness to include the moments when you just feel I'm done. And to include it with some tenderness, that really is the way through. And one example I was sharing with Jack that I heard the other day in terms of being patient and loving in, when we're feeling discouraged was of how do you feel when you watch a toddler trying to learn to walk? Mm-hmm. And they fall on their bum and they fall on their nose and they cry but they keep going. They are fueled by this intense urge to be able to walk around like everyone else they can see. And they keep going and they finally learn to walk. Well, do you feel impatient with them? Do you feel like, wow, they're kind of a jerk. They keep falling down. What's up with that kid? You don't. You understand. And my first teacher, that Zen master, De Saint-Denis, he used to say, the spirit of practice is fall down 100 times, get up 101 times.
Wow.
So, I would frame it as a developmental process.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jack, how about you? Whoops. Apologies.
Oh, no, it's nice to have background sounds. It's part of our mindfulness practice to include it all. I appreciate it. When I first learned to practice mindfulness in the Buddhist monasteries, there was more of a developmental model that you would get more concentrated or get deeper, have certain insights. You find it in Zen and Tibetan teachings as well. you answer the sequence of koans, or you go through a series of practices. Where we're going is where we are. And so I've really shifted a lot. It's not that people don't need to sit through all the things that are there. In some way, it takes a tremendous amount of courage to be able to meditate, but it's not the courage of going somewhere. It's actually the courage to be here. And maybe another language for it is it's the courage of love. And so the communication, which kind of matches what you were saying, Trudy, is to communicate to people that your heart is big enough, that born in you is this capacity as a human being to hold this world in compassion, because it actually is who you are. And that's a very different game in some way than people trying to get enlightened somewhere out there. It's actually in here. It's who you are in your most deep and fundamental way. And that also then communicates a trust and a sense of seeing when I work with people. Again, it follows what Trudy is talking about. The language is to see the secret beauty inside each person that they may not even see, but shining in them is the Buddha nature, is their original dignity. And practice in some way of meditation is to allow that, to inhabit that, and to see all the things that get in the way, not because they're bad, but that they're not who you really are. And that level of trust, and maybe some sense of mystery. You know, it's not that enlightenment gets you the answer. Rather, it awakens you to the vastness of this mystery of consciousness itself. And that perspective, that sense of vastness, not like this, but of opening the heart and opening the mind. You remember that famous Ojibwe saying, sometimes I go about pitying myself when all the while I'm being carried by great winds across the sky. It is our life. There's something so much bigger than our worries and our problems and the things we get identified with. And mindfulness, I like the phrase mindful loving awareness, which is the phrase Ram Dass used a lot, loving awareness, is actually the space of loving awareness that can witness, that says, wow, this phase of life, this relationship, these difficulties, these beautiful things, these are appearing in consciousness itself, in the heart that's recognizing them in the space of loving awareness. And that becomes a shift where we're free, whether we're in in a conflict with someone or trying to get something done. There's a part of us that's not just lost in it, but actually has this sense of spaciousness and loving awareness as an abiding.
Beautiful. I can't help, when you were talking, I was remembering about, Ram Dass, who, passed early this year and had such an impact on all of our lives. And you had gone to a ceremony, I think, in remembrance of him, and somebody had talked about how he purified over the years. He became who they thought he was when they met him. Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was Krishna Das talking at one of those memorials. And he'd known Ram Dass because he'd gone to India in like 1969 or 70 or something, when Ram Dass was there with their guru Neem Karoli Baba, and he'd read Be Here Now, and he wanted to go. And Ram Dass was already a celebrity, working with Tim Leary and then turning into the bearded teacher that he was. But as Ram Dass would say, at that time, he was rather uncooked. Yeah. So even though he could expound on love and wisdom and freedom and so forth, personally, he could be trouble. He could be trouble. He'd be judgmental and grasping, all the things that make us human. Now I think he would just laugh. And the phrase I like to use, which he would appreciate, is only human. We're all just only human. That's who we are. Yeah. But the beautiful thing Krishna Das said as he was doing, he said in honoring Ram Dass, he became the man that we thought he was when we first met him. And that was a gorgeous tribute, because who he had seemed was an illuminated being And
Yeah.
by the time his life was done, he'd let go of so much. He became transparent to love and to light. And that is really who we are. We are that. And then we get encased in our fears, and it's called the body of fear. And it acts into grasping and afraid, all those things. But that's not who we are. And when we're born, when a baby's born, we love this little baby. And when at the end of life, when you're holding somebody's hand at the last, it's a gesture of love.
Yeah.
And in between that love coming in and love going out, that's actually what we are, is love. And then we get to do our drama and our human dance. And Ram Dass, with loving awareness, with mindfulness, could see this and say, yeah, this is the way it is, with its, the tainted glory of humanity, the beauty and the suffering of it, and hold it all with love. And that's what mindfulness offers us.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm curious, if we look out at our kind of world in this time. We're in the middle of COVID. We are about 90 days before presidential election. There's a lot of energy around kind of what happens when people don't see their divine nature, and what happens when we have leadership that cannot see their own divine nature, other people's divine nature. How do you see kind of activism in the world, and how do you see as a society and as a world we can kind of create space to hear about the pain of those who've been subject to all kinds of wounds and hardships, and that also we can speak our voice in terms of the kind of leaders that we want, and do it from a place of that loving spaciousness? How do you hold both of those realms of like, oh, we're all one, that person that I disagree with is also a Buddha nature, and we can't keep this going, like we have to intervene. How do you both kind of dance with both of those aspects in yourself, Trudy? And I'm curious how that works in your world, or how you see that dance.
Well, I really see mindfulness as being about holding both, in the sense that, stepping back and receiving the moment with clarity and being able to really see how things are, and being honest about what we see. Sometimes I think a definition of mindfulness could be honesty and clarity, but then there is an ethical component, and it's not just about being focused and concentrated and quiet, or present and seeing clearly. It's also about, what do we do with that? How do we act in our life? Yeah. How do we get up from the cushion or the chair, and then what? How do we be mindful? And when we're really awake and we feel the suffering, we don't feel separate from that. And so then it becomes a question of balance. Like, how much do we do in our outer world, and how much do we tend to our inner life? And to me, we're always falling out of balance in that way. Sometimes we go on retreat and all we want to ever do is meditate and fantasize about spending the rest of our life doing that. And other times we're out there, and, at Insight LA, the nonprofit that I founded, we have spent a lot of energy creating what we call Insight in Action, which is how we serve out in the community, and a lot of attention to the diversity, equity, and inclusion and anti-racism issues. And, then you can get very deeply involved in that and forget to step back and recharge and refuel, so to speak, on the cushion, where we remember again that we're not separate from the people that we're trying to serve, and we're not separate from the people that are doing things we may even hate. That we're all in this one life together. And so from my perspective, we absolutely need both sides. We need the contemplative aspect of mindfulness, and then we need the mindfulness in action. And it's a dance. And I know for myself, I'm always falling out of balance on one side or the other. But I think Suzuki Roshi talked about this. He said, against a backdrop of perfect balance, where there's a wisdom in the world and an aliveness to the moment that we can 100% trust. And even if we don't know what will happen and what will become of our efforts. We make them anyway.
That's great. That's great. I know in Ram Dass's house on his altar, he used to have a picture of like Ramana Maharshi and different teachers. And then he also had like a Caspar Weinberger, I think he was Secretary of Defense at the time. And he had other people on his
Cheney, Donald
And
Trump.
he had Trump too, recently.
Yeah. Was that right? Okay.
Yeah.
It was such an expression of
Yeah,
holding all of it.
exactly.
How do you see that, Jack? How do you see the heart and the action and the and is there a place for fuck you? No, we're not going to do this. Or is there a place?
Yes, there is. Thank you.
Whatever the languaging
Fuck
around.
you, thank you. You know, I mean, a lot of ways people are brokenhearted right now. The level of suffering from the pandemic that's fallen especially hard on poor people, on the Black and the Latino community, on disenfranchised people, the level of economic disparity, the fact that in our country, anyway, the healthcare system is such that people don't get cared for in the, the modern world. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And there's a tremendous amount of grief. And with that grief, one aspect of it also is anger at the injustice of it all, which is understandable, whether it's people on the streets, as Martin Luther King said something like, rioting is the voice of those who had no voice before. Even though 98% of people on the street, myself out there included, are actually out there standing for something that they care about, not just expressing it in a rageful way, but just saying this has to stop. We have to do something different. And one of the things people need to understand, since this is a mindfulness summit, is that the word mindfulness itself in Pali or Sanskrit, sati sampajanya, has two parts. One is mindful presence, and the other is mindful or suitable response, like breathing in and breathing out. So Mahatma Gandhi took 1 day a week in silence. No matter what, taking apart the British Empire, everything's falling apart. People would knock on his door. Gandhiji, hundreds of thousands of people in the streets, people dying, you must come. He said, I'm sorry, it's Thursday. It's my quiet day.
Was it Thursday?
I don't know. I just made that up,
No.
as I do. But it was his quiet day, his weekly day. Maybe it was Sunday. I don't know what calendar he used.
But he knew if he didn't have that day.
And he said, I need to take a day, as we all do. I need to take time to quiet my mind and tend my heart so that then I can listen to how I actually can make a difference. My colleague and friend Magos Ananda, who is the Gandhi of Cambodia and led all these amazing peace marches after the genocide through the killing fields and the minefields and bring people back together. He was speaking in Congress, and he was part of that group that eventually won the Nobel Prize for trying to get rid of landmines because so many children had lost their legs in Cambodia and so forth. And he got up in front of Congress and he said, of course, please vote for this measure and this bill. He said, but more importantly, we have to remove the landmines from the heart. And that's really what it means when we sit and quiet ourselves, that we feel our full humanity and hold it with compassion. Our rage, which is understandable, it's part of our grief and pain, and we carry the suffering of the world, and tend it in a way with that big heart of compassion and understanding so that we get up and instead of contributing to the conflict, we actually become courageous and willing and strong, able to, as we breathe in, then able to breathe out some presence and wisdom that make a difference. And we can say no, or we can say, yes, you have to do this. And I've been involved in a project that started before this election called Yogins, Y-O-G-I-N-S. The website, it's yogis, yoga teachers and Buddhist teachers get out the vote, help get out the vote. And the website is yoginsunited.com.
Right.
But Yogins United is Buddhists and yoga teachers and their whole communities working to register people that they know, to email and do cards and call and all the things you can to get people so that people realize that there is a fundamental dignity and value in their voice being heard.
Mm-hmm.
And that when we actually empower and hear the voices in the hearts of people, and people are willing to stand up, that actually becomes the source of change that we need.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Did you have something to add, Trudy? I didn't know if you did. Are you?
Oh, I think just that I really feel the simple practices of mindfulness, just being simple and real and present with our own existence, and the aliveness of that is an antidote to some of the loneliness
Yeah.
and separation that people are feeling
Yeah.
at this time of being sheltered and physical distancing and all of that. And,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, Zen Master Hakuin, an 18th century Zen master, he said this beautiful thing, maybe paraphrasing it a bit, but he said, you know, one mouthful of reality relieves the eternal hunger, the eternal hunger and loneliness that we humans feel. And really being able to open our minds, our hearts, be with our bodies, just be so alive in the nowness of our existence. This is just a simple to say, not so easy to do, but a simple practice that we've been given that can, I'm watching it in my meetings, you know, every week with people, that it's helping them. The practice is helping them right in the midst of all of that Jack has been talking about and that we all know about.
Yeah. I think there's definitely the fear and the insecurity. There's also people I know who haven't been touched for 5 or 6 months by another human because they're living alone or they've seen very few people. And then there's other people who are in 2-bedroom apartments with 3 or 4 kids and a parent and a wife or husband, and it worked for a while because they'd all go to school or all go, you know, to work. And now there's a pressure cooker feeling, I think, from all different directions that people are experiencing, and most of us are not taught how to be with whatever is arising in a way that's wise, that's kind of wise relationship, which is kind of what I hear you saying.
Yeah.
And so I do feel like a lot of people are looking for that piece today, which is
absolutely, and which is a kind of weird silver lining of the pandemic. I mean, there are changes that are happening, and this is one of them. I mean, I was telling Jack, I went to the dentist. I had to go to the dentist, and the dental hygienist said to me when I walked in, this was her greeting. She said, "How does it feel to be living in the middle of a quantum leap?" And huh? But it was beautiful too, you know, because things aren't going to go back to exactly the way they were. Yeah. Whatever happens, they can't. It's not the way impermanence works.
So,
and go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Finish.
No.
You please, my dear, finish.
We're always like this. We
never
interrupt each other.
Keep going.
I can't even remember what I was going to say now.
Well, there is a place that we're in enormous suffering and pain, and there's another place that we're in a quantum belief of something, right?
Exactly. And just again, to be able to hold both sides in some way. And I think the other thing about the practice is that, and maybe it was just my first teacher who really, his whole meditation instruction to us was to work with the koan of what am I, and the impossibility of knowing. Mm-hmm. He coined that phrase, don't know mind, you know, because working with the mystery of being, all that is unknown to us all the time, but in the stability and familiarity of our routines, we don't really get to feel that. But now it's in our face. Yeah. And so being able to work with that, just so much uncertainty and so much unknown. Yeah. And this is another possibility that the practice can bring to those of you who are out there listening.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, and what I was going to get very concrete about meditation itself, in that as you sit during these times, you are likely to experience the very things that you and Trudy were talking about, whether it's your loneliness, you know, or grief or loss, or just feeling shut in, you know, unbearable restlessness, or maybe, you know, because you haven't had difficulty, you feel your privilege, and then you feel like ashamed, like what should I do, or guilt. All these things are triggered, or the kind of losses. And what mindfulness does when you begin to sit, again, using the phrase mindful loving awareness, is first you establish your seat on the earth. You take your seat like the Buddha that you are, halfway between heaven and earth. And for some people, even helps to feel like they have roots going into the ground, because you come out of this earth. That's what your body is made of, the bones, and your blood is like, you know, the salt water of the sea, and the bones are the minerals of the earth. And you take your seat in the earth, steady like a Buddha that you are. And then these experiences arise, or they're there in the body and the heart, and you receive them with a field of loving awareness. It helps to name them. Oh, this is sadness or grief, and to give it space. And then all the tears you've held in might weep. Or this is rage, and you feel the fire of it, and you allow it to open. Rage, opening, fire. And you see that energy. You begin to become familiar with, or make friends, if you will, with the energies of life. And then loneliness comes. Well, where do you feel that loneliness in your body, in your heart, or your gut? You actually become present for it, and you name it lonely, and then you feel like you're going to die of loneliness, and then you name that dying, you know. And then your mind says, yeah, but I wonder what I should cook for dinner, because it has no pride. And you see loneliness, dying, and dinner all arising and passing within that space. And by the time you've sat for a time, all these waves come and go, and you start to trust more and more the space of loving awareness and compassion. You become the Buddha that can see all of this, so that when you get up, even though all your experiences are your humanity, there's some way in which you're settled in presence and in love, and you're a little nicer to the person you're living with, we hope. And, you know, you feel a little bit more empowered, or instead of feeling guilt and shame because you have privilege, you realize that it's your assignment, that somehow you've been given this karmically, whatever language you want to use, you've been given this place in this cosmic dance. What are you going to do with it?
Yeah.
Not only tend yourself, but tend the world. And so with that capacity to be present, it allows you then to change the way you are in the world, because you're a different person. You're not so identified with the emotions and the fears and the story the mind tells.
Right, that's beautiful, beautiful. And that what enters that spaciousness is kind of less your concern and more the container that can hold it and allow it.
Absolutely, because everything will come. The mind has no pride. It will do anything, you know, and you go, oh, that's just the mind.
Yeah.
That's it. But who you are is not the thoughts, and you're not the emotions, and not the body. You're actually the consciousness that was born into your body, that will leave it when you're done. You'll find out, you'll see. But that's who you are. You know, you're not just made of whatever it is, kale and chips and Big Macs or whatever you eat. It's your identity is something much more timeless than all of that. And it's not far away. It's what's listening right now. It's the awareness itself.
Beautiful. We're almost out of time. Thank you so much. Is there anything we did not address that seems important to address? Or Trudy, is there anything that you feel like you want to touch on as we close this session with you?
Well, first of all, I just want to encourage everybody to actually do the practice, because the one thing about mindfulness, the one drawback I would say is it really only works if you do it. It's not enough to read about it or think about it. You have to actually try it and do it. And then, you know, what Jack was talking about, that sort of figure ground shift, where instead of always identifying with the contents of our thoughts and our experiences, we take this backward step and shift back into more identification with loving awareness itself. And that changes everything, even though nothing may have changed.
Beautiful. How about you, Jack? Anything, final thoughts?
So a couple things. One is that I have a program that's free, that if you want to send out to everybody at the summit, you could, that I did with Tara Brach, called Mindfulness Daily. It's 40 days of 15 minutes of instruction and meditation that go through all the dimensions of mindfulness. having something like that. There are lots of good apps and things to listen to, but you're welcome to use that for the summit if you like, or people can just go on my website and click on it. It's free. But having that kind of support, because we can't go and meet with others and sit with others. And in some way, making community is a big part of what it means to sustain this perspective that doesn't get lost in all of the conflict and the news and, you know, all the things that are difficult now. We have to go through them, but there's a very different way, and we can be connected with a bigger community and get our teachings and so that's really important. Mm-hmm. And then the last thing is to have some joy. Mindfulness is not a grim duty, you know, and changing the world is not a grim duty. If you can change the world at all, and you can't change it, but you can mend the part that your hands can touch and do the things that you can bring groceries to your neighbors if you're young, or you can, you know, go online and tend, or whatever the things are that matter to you. And I think about going to the airport to a big demonstration with my daughter, who's an asylum lawyer, and all these young hotshot Berkeley lawyers that are part of her nonprofit. When the airports were closed, not allowing visitors from those 7 predominantly Muslim countries, and in the middle of 2,000 demonstrators at the airport, our gate had 400 people, and everybody's chanting, "No ban, no fear, American refugees, welcome here," things like that. Usual demonstration, which is a little of an old mode, I would say. In the middle of it, there was this New Orleans jazz band. And so as we were chanting, the drummer kicked in with a rhythm and everybody started to kind of chant with it. And then the horn came on and blew a real riff on top, and the sax started to play. And pretty soon it was like, "No ban, no fear, refugees welcome here." And we're all singing and dancing, 400 of us. The cops are smiling, the security guards are dancing and moving. We were there. We stood up and we weren't leaving, but we were doing it with art and heart. We weren't making it other. We were just saying, this matters to us and the world matters to us, and we're going to make it more beautiful. And we'll do whatever we need to do to make that happen.
That's beautiful. And we'll have fun, or we'll have joy while
we'll have fun. Yeah. Exactly. Don't forget, as Molly Ivins, the great actress, says, you know, kick butt out there, but don't forget to have fun doing it.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you so much for taking the time. And I so appreciate both of you in the world and my life. And I love that you can be together and teach together.
Thank
and
you.
I know.
Like this.
Great.
Most of the time I feel very lucky.
Yeah.
That's how it works.
Thank you again.
Thank you, my dear. Love you. Thanks,
Everybody.
Soren.
Thank you.